America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Jamie Bowers. I am one of the producers of the show and Elaine's sidekick today here.
Thanks for sitting in today, Jamie. I appreciate it. And you can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. So, Jamie, before we have our guest on, we are very excited that, and shocked, obviously, to see that the House came together bipartisan. I think they only had 70 no votes on the extending the tax cuts. So that small businesses can continue being able to expense capital expenditures, which in layman's terms basically means if I buy a big piece of machinery that creates, 20 jobs, I get to expense that piece of machinery in the year I buy it, which thankfully all of the people that voted for this understand that that's how you incentivize businesses to invest in their companies and thereby invest in jobs and ultimately their communities. I mean, that is how the circle works, right? Yeah.
And, I think when you talk about taxes, clearly there's a divide between the left and the right on certainly on the levels and who benefits. But it was nice to see them find something that they could agree on. And as you said, they're actually big deals. I think if you do not own a business, it's going to wash over you. It might not sound like much, but it's actually a big deal for small businesses. And we hear it from members of the Job Creators Network that this is something that makes a big difference on how fast a business can expand or grow. And when you're talking about expanding and growing, you're talking about jobs. And so that is encouraging. And so now, does this go to the Senate now? And what's the prognosis in the Senate, Elaine?
Well, I read on Politico this morning that this is a bipartisan deal between Chairman Smith, who's chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and Chuck Schumer. So I don't think they'll bring it to a vote unless they know that they've got enough senators to pass it. They certainly didn't bring it to a vote unless they knew they had enough people in the House. And, we had Whip Emmer on our year-end call recently, and he felt really good about it, and he hadn't even whipped the votes yet. And then, a day or two later, it goes for a vote, and it passed with flying colors. I just don't see votes like that. Yes votes that high anymore. It's always just split down the middle.
You're right. It's unless it's like Dolly Parton Day. That they're all voting on that, doesn't cost anything and you're just doing something ceremonial. But you're right. And side note, I've always really appreciated the name as the House Whip. I feel like, there are a few things that are cooler than to be Whip Emmer, it sounds like, it sounds like a college nickname. Somebody go, get the whipper in here, man. He really can, down some brews. So I always thought the whip was a fun position in the legislative house. So.
Yeah, there was some sticking points for some folks. One was, Chairman Smith was on the same call with Whip Emmer, and one was that there was kind of these rumors that were started the illegal immigrants would be able to get the expansion of the child tax credit, which was part of the compromise. Obviously, Republicans had to bend on that and expand the child tax credit in return for getting the extension of the tax cuts. And, the chairman made it very clear that that was not true at all, that, a child had to have a Social Security number if you were going to apply for this expanded tax credit, and made it very clear that that wasn't the case. But obviously an attempt to try to, kind of sink the compromise and what had happened. And, he made an interesting point. He said what Republicans need to remember is that the child tax credit was actually born by them in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the original of 2017.
No pun intended, using the verb born there.
It was theirs. So, they've got to live with it. And whether you like it or not, whether you're a fan of it or not, that's where we're at. And so to get what we want, that's called compromise. And that's how we move the ball forward for the American people. And that's what the American people want us to do. And they wanted to do it in the best interest of ultimately everybody. And so small businesses are really going to benefit from this. We know in the Trump years, the success of this bill it's irrefutable. I mean, the success of these tax cuts, immediate expensing, the 20% pass through, created jobs that allowed wage increases, investments in companies. All of that is absolutely true. You cannot dispute it at all. Yeah, right?
Yeah. Well, and going back to your statement about the child tax credit and the rumors that were going around, and it is so frustrating to me as a communications professional, especially here in Washington. It's one thing to highlight message points that are beneficial to whatever side you might be on. And I understand when people on the left do that, they highlight the things that they think are most compelling. People on the right do it. But it's really frustrating when things that have no basis in fact, that are just, like you said, rumors, start circulating. And I think in the age of Twitter and X, or Twitter X, that these people can make flippant comments that get a lot of traction when they might be wrong. And so I find that whole exercise frustrating. But to your point, that's what compromise is.
Right.
A good bill is one where everybody's a little sour about it, that they had to give up something in there. But sometimes that's what you have to do to legislate. And
right.
These are big deals.
What's that saying? Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And I remember saying that in 2017 when the bill passed. Everything wasn't perfect about it. No, at all. No. And frankly, that was passed on partisan lines, and it still wasn't a perfect bill. But we couldn't let perfect be the enemy of the good, because it was such an important, we hadn't had tax cuts in 30 years. And we knew they worked then too, because Ronald Reagan did them. And, here we are again. It's like learn and purge. We just keep on having to learn the same lessons over and over and over again.
Well, and some of it happens incrementally. Things creep up because somebody needs, and it happens at the state level all the time, where you have a state that is they're at a deficit, their budget's at a deficit. And unlike the federal government, which can either print money or borrow money if they have a deficit, states aren't allowed to do that. And so they have to find the money somewhere. They either have to cut spending or they have to raise revenues. And when you say raise revenues, it means some sort of tax. So, if you own a house and you have to pay property taxes every year, it kind of ticks up a little bit at a time, or their income taxes go up a little bit, or sales taxes go up 0.25%. All of those things start to creep up over the years. And as you said, Reagan, there was some really big tax cuts in the Reagan years. But so things came down, but they have been creeping up as you go along. And it was time to kind of right the ship, so to speak. And so hopefully we can extend them, because while these elements that they just passed and likely will pass the Senate soon are great, the bulk of the tax cuts are going to expire in 2025. And so that is a big deal. And I think people need to hold politicians accountable, especially politicians who like to wave the banner of "I'm pro small business." Every politician likes to show up at the local diner and shake hands and talk about how they're a friend of small business. But I don't think you can be a friend of small business and be against extending these tax cuts or making them permanent. And so I hope voters realize that really is a litmus test for friendship to small business. If you want to say you're a friend to small business, you better put your money where your mouth is and support these tax cuts.
Well, and as you know, Jamie, we are going to spend this entire year doing exactly that. And we're going to work with small business owners across the country, and we're going to get them out there talking in the media, talking in their communities, testifying on the Hill, and making sure that we are the voice of small business, that we magnify that voice on what these tax cuts really mean. And when you say litmus test, it means if you're running for office, you should understand that small businesses need these tax cuts, and Americans need to know who's going to support, which candidates are going to support small business tax cuts, because that's what's going to help states across this country, communities across this country, minority communities, minority small businesses, business owners as well. And we're going to make sure that those voices are heard across papers and radio and TV programs across the country. You're going to see small business owners in every town talking about how tax cuts, they cannot afford to lose these tax cuts, particularly after how they were just decimated by the pandemic. And to do that to them just a few years later would be absolutely catastrophic.
Yeah. And, one of the things too is in 2017, when these tax cuts were put into place, inflation wasn't where it is now. And so if you think about, if you're an employee of somewhere and, you've gotten raises since 2017, whether it's even just, cost of living adjustments and things like that. If you're a small business owner, you also, your income is based on your small business and how well it's doing. And if all of a sudden these tax cuts go away in 2025, you're going to get a huge hit to your pay. And not only is it a hit to your pay, but it's even more impactful because everything's more expensive than it was in 2017.
Yeah.
A lot more expensive.
Yeah.
And
these aren't
tough.
just small business tax cuts. Remember that when these expire, it's going to be expiring on individuals as well. So it's not just our small businesses, which account for a big part of our population. But it's also going to be on individuals, married couples, single people. I mean, it is going to hit the tax rates across the board. Are going to go up, even at the lowest tax rates are going to go up. So it is very important that people understand that we cannot let these tax cuts expire.
Yeah.
And today we're joined by Bryce Eddy. Bryce is an entrepreneur and businessman. He spent more than 25 years in risk management, insurance, and security industries. Owns 805 Combat Sports it's 805 Combat Sports in Southern California, and hosts the Bryce Eddy Show, also right here on Salem Podcast Network. So you're kind of a close cousin for us, Bryce. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys today because I think we are in a crazy war, and you guys are talking about it from sort of the small business side of things, but I think it's a pretty large context. So I'm excited to just chat things through.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing. I mean, you've got a business in Southern California. You mentioned you just moved to Idaho. Tell us about you.
Yeah. So, my daughter, I have three, 20, 19, and 15. And my my daughter, my youngest, who was then 12, said, "Hey, Dad, what do I tell people when they ask what you do for a living?" And I said, "Just tell them I'm a many-layered onion," because I do have a lot of things going that are both, kind of entrepreneurship model within a very big $3 billion firm in the insurance space. And then I've got, middle-sized business that I'm associated with, and then a small business that I have. And so I get to touch a lot of things, and I get exposure, especially through the insurance business, because we're consulting other businesses. I get to kind of see what's happening in the economy, and we a little bit of a bellwether because we see how people are doing and kind of what's coming down the pike. And so I get to have this real varied perspective on things, and then I get to choke people to relieve stress in my jiu-jitsu world. So it's a fun life I lead.
What have you? Tell me about what combat sports are. I mean, I'm not even familiar with that term. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So I'm a longtime mixed martial artist. So the UFC has made that very popular. But I started years ago when nobody knew what any of this was, and been having fun. And like I said, there's nothing more stress relieving than to choke somebody unconscious after work. So it's a great outlet for guys like me.
We should do that at Job Creators Network as an employee bonding experience.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, as long as you're not the one getting choked, I think it could be really fun.
Exactly.
Oh, hey, it's great fun either way. And I tell people, come try Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Give me a year, and I'll give you a superpower. So it's a fun thing.
Well, it's nice that it's a little bit unlike Fight Club in that you can actually talk about it. So that's good.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, one of the things, I mean, it's a neat perspective you have, since you have kind of this macro to micro view of things from the economy, especially trying to do business in California. Talk a little bit about all the ways government can be helpful in theory to a small business or even a large business. And what are the ways that you've seen kind of firsthand that have made it really tough to do business?
Yeah, so I mean, throughout the whole of the United States, I believe that there's a war on small business. So California isn't special, although when we were warming up and chatting earlier, I said California hates its citizens. It also hates its businesses, but specifically its small businesses. If you think about what it takes now to start a business, the regulations, the hoops that you have to jump through, just the financial consideration that you need to have to start a business, it's grown more onerous over the years. And it has done that expressly to kind of wipe out small business competition. When you think about it, our government is in league with really the corporatists. The big mega companies can afford to do things and afford to handle a tremendous financial and legal load that a small business can't. And they lobby for that over time because they'd rather not have innovative competition coming up. It's a much larger war that we're in. And I talked a lot on my show that we have a war against sovereignty. And that includes at the national level. You're seeing it with the border dispute. You're seeing it, kind of the globalists wanting to centralize things further and further. You have this kind of elite oligarchy that's made up of these, multi-bazillionaires, their corporations, and then their political puppets serve them. And so we're in this time where they do not want us to be decentralized. And so that manifests itself in the business realm by the continued pressure that small businesses face just trying to exist and eke out a profit. And that is really, kind of the theme, a lot of the theme of my show is we're talking about like, who is they? People will talk about, they don't want us to this, they don't want us to that. Well, who is they? And the truth is, it's those elites that are using the idea of communism and socialism and all that stuff to kind of gin up tribal warfare. But that's a sales pitch. The truth is, they want global feudalism. And this feudalism 2.0 means that, they're in charge, they're making the decisions, and we're all the slaves.
It's interesting. I totally agree that when you get to regulations and you have some of these corporatists, as you call them, they recognize that they have they have the legal help, they have the compliance people. They can handle a certain amount of regulations, and that the price, while it might be expensive for them to comply, it comes with the benefit of reducing the competition they have, because they know that small upstarts it makes it that much harder to get into their market. But I do think that there's a number of regulations that come down that start to strangle small businesses that are purely out of ignorance. In that you have, in the California House and Senate, hundreds of legislators who all have their own little pet peeves. They have their own little, soapboxes. And if each one of them adds some sort of small thing that a small business has to comply with, it adds up very quickly. And I think part of the problem is many legislators have never written a paycheck to somebody, never signed a paycheck. They haven't run a business. And so they have no idea of what it is to try to comply with all the federal statutes, all the state statutes, and everything in between. And so I think that ignorance is it has really damaged our ability to give people the chance at the American dream.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, there's a do something disease in Washington and in our state capitals where, someone gets elected and they think they've got to do something. And yes, there are these little pet projects, there are these little things. And so that's why you see that thousands of laws are passed every single year. Try Googling for a minute the number of laws we have in the United States. Okay, Google can't come up with the answer. The best I was able to come up with was something like 2 million plus. Okay. When our founding fathers created this wonderful experiment, there was an idea that the citizen had to know the law. We had to know it so that we could, adhere to it and, live under the rule of law. It's now unknowable. And then if you're going to add the regulations on top of it, then I mean, boy, it's almost infinite, especially because of the number of things that they're continuing to enact on us, every year by people, yes, who've never run a business, people who have never been ever successful outside of politics or, law. And it's a tremendous beating that we take as the citizen just trying to keep up with all of these things. And it's counterproductive. It throws a wet blanket on our economy. And yeah, it specifically attacks smaller businesses and sole proprietors.
Mm-hmm.
Well, California's kind of been first, that's a bad word to say. California has made significant environmental obstacles, put them in place that obviously makes things very challenging for small businesses. But in reading some of the most recent moves of your former governor, I won't say your current governor, is the move to outlaw gas-powered pretty much everything, lawnmowers, all of it, and even vehicles. I just wonder is there a lobbying group for the lawn mowing industry, for Grass Cutters Association of America? I mean, how do you think they're going to run an extension cord, to their lawnmowers and try to cut lawn that way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is really an attack on very small businesses. Your local gardener, is got a very tiny business, and yeah, they just put onerous restrictions on them. And yes, battery technology has improved, all of that. They do all of that under the guise of environmentalism, but it is not more safe for the environment. That's the irony here. We have slave children in the Congo digging out cobalt. I mean, we have a horrific and horrendous problem with the EV world. But the truth is this is a balance of power shift, because if you think about it, one of the most conservative industries is oil and gas, or some of those, traditional fossil fuels businesses. And they had tremendous power for many, many years. And that's what's under direct attack. It's not really about the environment. It's about shifting power. The same way the lockdowns were a massive transfer of wealth away from small businesses and small restaurants and things like that in favor of chains. So we have all of these battlefronts, all of these little areas that are happening right now as the world is moving towards that, globalist model that I mentioned earlier. But they're truly destroying markets intentionally to enrich themselves, give power to these globalist elites, and destroy the small guys and people who want to have liberty.
Well, you're in a sanctuary state, and of course, I don't have to describe the chaos to you. I mean, we all see it across, across news stories every day. There's not just sort of the immigration crisis, but there's also the crime that's coming across, the drugs, and the trafficking. Child trafficking. I mean, there's just so many issues there. But then there's also, we do a national poll of small business owners. And what we saw this month pop up to a higher level is crime really hurting these small businesses because of the cost of having to replace the inventory that's being stolen, right out of their stores. And there's really nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, with Prop 47, which was, one of the genius moves California did, they made it to where a lot of things that were ordinarily felonies became misdemeanors, and that included theft, retail theft. If it's less than, I think it's $950, right. It's no longer a felony, and it's something that most of the time they don't go after or even prosecute. So you have gangs of shoplifters. You have all kinds of things that are happening that are destroying small retailers, and even the large ones are suffering massive losses. I think it was something like a $2 billion loss that they posted just based on the industry, retail industry's losses. I mean, it's unbelievable what's happening there. And then you look at In-N-Out. In-N-Out is closing its first location in Oakland because people, while they were dining in the restaurant, were getting their cars broken into and everything stolen from them. So those are conditions that are directly attributed to Gavin Newsom, his policies. Remember, this is a guy who wrecked and ruined San Francisco as mayor, sowed the seeds of its destruction, and then we promoted him to governor. I mean, Californians get what they deserve in a certain respect. But it's horrific what's happening, and yes, the border and the influx there and all those things are also causing that problem with crime. We have Chilean burglars that are robbing neighborhoods on a regular basis. They're busting in, posing as hikers, hiking into really expensive communities through the trail systems, busting through master bedroom sliders and stealing all the purses and watches and everything else laying around and hiking back out. And it's whole gangs of people doing this across California. I mean, it's terrible.
Well, Bryce, I mean, come on. Those people at least are not adding CO2 to the environment. If they're hiking away from these crimes, at least they're doing
Fair
it
point.
in a sustainable way.
Yeah.
You got to appreciate. I actually was at a big box hardware store this weekend, and it was the first time I had to get a tool that is under lock and key now that was not under lock and key a year ago. But she not only the associate not only unlocked the thing to get it for me, but then told me it would be waiting for me at cash register 9. I couldn't even grab it then. Like, they don't give it to you anymore, which is the first time that's happened to me, where I'm not allowed to touch it until I have paid for it. So, I mean, I really feel for these stores, especially and you know, as you said, the larger corporations have at least some ability to try to mitigate that risk in terms of they have enough volume of sales that it hurts, but it's not going to put them out of business. But if you're a small franchisee of something and you have a gang, come and steal 20% of your inventory, it's a huge deal.
Well, I know Target had to make a disclosure in their earnings statement last year because it was material to their bottom line. They had on the theft. I mean, it was in the hundreds of billions of dollars on theft. So when you're a big corporation like that and everybody thinks, they can absorb it, they're big, it's nothing. When you're making a material disclosure in your statements to your shareholders because the theft is so bad, just think how that little guy feels. I have a friend who works in a retail store up in Georgia. I think it's North Face or one of those stores like that. And they are instructed to just stand there when people come in and do nothing. But they literally come in weekly and just steal. And there's no shame in it. They're not afraid. They walk in and they walk out with hands full of stuff and they are not allowed to do anything.
Yeah, no, it's a shame. And I'm an advocate and I'm going to lobby the Trump administration if he gets in to be part of the Department of Justice. And I want to be part of the corporal punishment wing because I believe we need to be bringing back caning. And we could actually solve this overnight. We would need to really make it possible for people to actually defend their property and not be prosecuted in the act of defending their property. So you could overnight change the complexion on this whole entire problem. I'm not sure if you guys saw the video, but there was a couple of Sikhs that owned a liquor store that gave a good beating to a repeat thief that had stolen from them many times, and he was dragging a trash can through there and dumping cigarettes and products into this trash can, and he was going to walk out, and they had just had enough. And you could see that they just finally hit their breaking point because it was their small business. And they beat this guy with a stick about his legs and his back and all that stuff until he was, crying in submission. And that's what you need to have happen. You need tough security guards to, nab one of these, mob thieves. You need to do some actual masculine violence to a few of these folks, and all of a sudden it will change. I don't think you need to lock them up. I think you need to beat them up. How's that for a hot take?
There you go.
Slogan. That's a great campaign slogan. Don't lock them up, beat them up. Well, I would be remiss not to talk about the bill, the actually bipartisan bill. I can hardly say the word because it barely ever happens, that passed the House on the extension of the tax cuts. And the importance of that, we talk to small business owners all the time. The provisions that were extended had to do with the R&D credits and the immediate expensing. I know the 20% tax deduction is still in place until 2025. Now all those things are in place till the end of 2025. But we have a manufacturer up in Pennsylvania. I mean, he called the immediate expensing a game changer for him and his business. And so, it's just so rare that we see Congress come together and do something for the American people versus for their own political livelihoods. But now we're staring at this horizon of expiration in 2025. So, I mean, it doesn't that kind of become the litmus test for every candidate running for office. Do you support small business tax cuts, or are you going to let them expire? And let every single person in this country know who's supporting them and who's not.
Yeah, it should be something that everybody comes together on, because it right now, there's a whole bunch of fake success going on, and you can see that in the stock performance, the S&P and all that right now. It's fake, right? It's ginned up. The reality is the people who are living in this economy. I mean, I got some texts from some wealthy friends of mine. They're like, "Hey, the market's doing great. Wow, that was a nice day for me." Okay, yeah, because you've got large investments and you can see and witness that. And your food bill and other things that are going on do not matter that much to you. But a small business owner and some of these people that are sole proprietors that are barely scraping by and all that stuff, I mean, all of these things matter to a booming economy, and it is important that we keep this going. I'm hoping that the Democrat Party specifically understands that it would be the death of them and the death of our economy, and that's why they're willing to do this, because we got an election coming up, and when they're all firmly in power and there's not the threat of a whole change in administration, then they'll get back at doing egregious things, but for now, hopefully we've bought ourselves some time.
Yeah, it's I think it's very tough second time around on extending this to say it wasn't successful. When the fight the first time in 2017 on these tax cuts, people said, "Oh, only the benefits will go to the rich. It's not going to do anything to the economy." And I think the proof is in the pudding, and they were very successful. And I think it's telling that the Democrats, I mean, part of some of the fight about the bill that passed this week in the House was about increasing the SALT deduction in states like California, New York, Virginia, that have higher state taxes, and what the Democrats were fighting for in those situations was only benefiting wealthy residents of those kind of deep blue states. And so I think if anybody should be accused of trying to help the rich more than the regular people and the small businesses, I think we know who it is.
Yeah, amen. Well, they are the parties have flipped in that regard. They talk about parties flipping and all those sort of things, but the truth is the conservatives and the Republicans are now more the party of the muscular class and the working man and small business, and the Democrats are not. It's a very interesting role reversal we've seen over the years. But again, a lot of that has to do with the big unions and all of those sort of things that these, big entities, like to suppress their competition, and the Democrats are all in for that.
Yep. Now, Bryce.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Elaine.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jamie.
I was just going to say, clearly you're a busy guy. You're running a small business. You have your consulting jobs, and you do your podcast. How did you get into doing your own podcast? How do you manage your time in order to do all of these things?
Yeah, well, I am a maniac for sure, and don't rest very easily, and I don't vacation very easily. Much to my wife's dismay. But I started, I got into the podcast situation because, I was going to Rob McCoy's church, Godspeak, in Thousand Oaks, California. And Rob was one of the few pastors in the country that we kept our church open. We persevered through that. We fought the government and won. And so we started doing a nightly live stream just to let everybody know what was happening and kind of stay in touch with the community while things were shut down. And I helped Rob get guests and kind of produce that live stream. And we just had fun doing it. And then we got to audition for a radio spot, and that went well. And then Salem said, "Hey, why don't you guys do a podcast?" And And so we crafted a deal with them. Rob joined me for 4 episodes, went on vacation, went to Israel, and never came back to the show. So it went from being a co-host spot to being my show. And then I just kept going. And I've been blessed to be behind the scenes with a lot of the conservative organizations out there, helping on the security consulting side. When Charlie Kirk was getting attacked in airports, he came to me to figure out, how we could get him protected. And I'm actually on one of Charlie's boards, and working with PragerU and all of these organizations behind the scenes. So I've been blessed to know a lot of people that are kind of in the fight on the front lines. And so, it's been pretty easy to get guests for my show. And it's been a fun project, and, kind of cheaper than therapy.
That's a good point, a good way to put it. Well, tell our audience how to find you, how to find your podcast. I have kind of an idea where to find your podcast, but I'll let you tell them.
Yeah. So, I'm on all of the podcast apps. So wherever you're getting that content, we're there. Also on Rumble. YouTube doesn't like me, and so they kept shutting me down because I said that Anthony Fauci was a fraud and some of those sort of things that you're not supposed to say, and caused all kinds of problems. So Rumble is where it's at. And then if you want to follow me, and it's the Bryce Eddy Show. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm Super Bryce Eddy on Instagram, and then Bryce Eddy 1 on Twitter.
Okay, great. Well, Bryce, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you watching and listening, you can subscribe to the show at Salem Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts from. New episodes are posted each week on Wednesdays and Fridays. We'll see you next time.